Hello there and welcome to a new episode of Afterthoughts. My name is Wim Winters and tonight I've recorded another Prelude and Fugue by Czerny. If you haven't seen the previous Prelude and Fugue, and maybe also the Afterthoughts, you might want to check it out. Because Czerny is not a name that normally is connected to this kind of historical keyboards or performances. And I go a little bit more in depth in the previous episode. Czerny is more a name connected with very boring etudes, and we do forget that he wrote about more than 1,000 opus numbers, which is incredibly much. And this Prelude and Fugue, as is the previous one, is coming from his Gradus at Parnassum, opus 822. So this is one opus number. There are 4 books, and I've learned in between now that I have 2 volumes of this, and both volumes are 2 volumes, so I have 4 volumes in 2 books, so to say. So that's huge, because it's full of preludes and fugues and exercises. Typically for that, and that's the last thing I will repeat from the previous episode, is that these preludes and fugues fit very well into the 5-octave keyboard. Sometimes there's one note missing in the bass, and as if Czerny forgot that he obviously was composing for 5-octave instruments. And don't forget, in this time, Czerny, that's the big Bach-revival with the Peters edition. And in my opinion, as I think about it now, the few things I know about that, it's Forkel, the Bach biographer, that he started really this Bach-revival. Bach was still, Common Sense was a big name, but his scores were not printed, so think about that. And by this Bach biography made by Forkel is so underestimated. I cannot emphasize that enough. People got aware, I think, of the importance of Bach and also the importance of getting these works published. And so you get a complete generation that's almost been thrilled by this Baroque discovery. And Mozart obviously was one of the first diving into that under the influence of Baron von Swieten. But and also he had a connection to old instruments, since and that's a very important thing. Maybe you can mention the fact actually that he, at the end of his life, all his life he was busy with clavichords, since his father was selling the Friederici clavichords. So it was very much business, but he did like the clavichords. That's something we forget. And at the end of his life, I think 87 or 88, he tried to buy the Silbermann clavichord, which was owned by Doles, one of the successors of Bach in Leipzig. And I very much would like to dive into that, or to read some articles if they are written. I don't know about that, but it's an interesting fact, and that's nothing to do with Czerny, but I say it anyway, that if Mozart wanted to have this Silbermann clavichord, which never happened because Doles didn't want to sell it, that means that the clavichord that in that time became very, very important. If it wasn't also, if it wasn't the fact already, but that Mozart wanted to have the Silbermann clavichord can also mean that by diving into this wohltemperierte Klavier that he got to learn to know through von Swieten, that he was searching for an instrument that Bach might have used for playing that. And of course, this Silbermann clavichord in Leipzig was connected to the Thomas Schule, and it's very much likely that Bach would have played on that. So that's just an imagine. I just am fantasizing about that. But if that's true, then the importance of the clavichord was very much known to Mozart, even end of the 18th century. So the focus would become much different from what we think about Mozart and his instrument today. But that's something else. That's a little bit off topic, and it's not, because that opened really it's all in this atmosphere from this Bach revival end of the 18th century. You could actually say that the important clavier method of Gottlob Turk is written not really in the same with the same intention for giving Bach the place he had to have, but it is also kind of cornerstone in the performance practice for Bach, since Turk was a second generation Bach student. I really want to make a documentary or some videos. Documentary is too large of a word. Some videos about on Turk. He is very interested person. Okay, back to Czerny, who was part of that movement that led to Mendelssohn and all the 19th century Bach adoration. So his preludes and fugues are undoubtedly to be seen in that tradition as exercises, but again, exercises in that time could mean very boring finger exercises, but these kind of exercises were compositorial and at the same time technical exercises for players. So that's what Czerny is doing also in this music. This F sharp minor prelude and fugue is very beautiful, and if you read some quotes of the early 19th century or even mid 19th century, you will find one of Franz Liszt, which obviously was a Czerny student, saying that Czerny is opus 7, which is a piano sonata, that's quite difficult, is a sign of a genius, Liszt said, and he continues by saying that it is a pity that Czerny somehow put quantity over quality, and that might be so. I mean, the oeuvre that Czerny wrote in his life is so impressive that he undoubtedly will not have had the time to dive really into what he was composing. But imagining that, the tempo of writing, and then coming in this opus 822 with a lot of very beautiful preludes and fugues, means that we might reconsider the importance of Czerny as well. Maybe together with what we did Kramer, but Kramer, the etudes of Kramer, I was very glad to read some very positive reactions. Not, of course, on the playing, that's something else. Everybody would like to have some positive comments, but on the music of Kramer, the etudes are really great music, and they serve their purpose very well of technical exercises, both, and producing very, very good music. But from Kramer, you could say, and that at least the works that I know, that his etudes are by far the most interesting works. What he wrote as sonatas and other things, to what I know from Kramer, is not on the same quality. That's something you cannot say from Czerny. He wrote very boring exercises, but they serve the kind of purpose of course, improving the technique of the student, of yourself as a player. And that kind of exercises actually are written also by Beethoven and Mozart, not in that quantity, but that Mozart wrote also finger exercises for his students. They're preserved and they're published in the Neue Mozart-Ausgabe. Doesn't mean that he is a boring composer. From Czerny, who wrote tons of boring exercises, and they are very good actually, these exercises. He became the boring composer, and we forgot what he left next to that. So this F sharp minor etude goes very well on the clavichord, although I must say the instrument should I say, I don't know if that's written with the clavichord in mind, and I say it exactly as I would like to say. It's, of course, you can assume that Czerny wrote it for pianoforte. Why not? On the other hand, the 6 and 6.5 octave pianoforte he would have at the time, why would he restrict himself for 5 octave? Maybe just because he felt that Bach did it as well. That might be so. Maybe he wrote it for another keyboard, older keyboard. That might have been a clavichord, might have been, I don't think a harpsichord, because the dynamic indications are so that it is impossible to play on a harpsichord, a classical harpsichord. But I don't want to say that he played it on a clavichord, but the technique required for that is it feels very good on the clavichord. That's all I can say. Although F sharp minor is a very difficult key. And I just go through some passages with you. So it starts like this. Strangely enough, in the left hand, we would, in Baroque music, play like this. He writes staccato notes on each note. It's strange, but it works great. Comes in the left hand, which is difficult. Since if you play this in the same kind of speed as our articulation in the right hand, and by the way, I don't play very legato. You can. So that you really have the emphasis on the second quarter note. It's indicated as that as well, with an accent mark. 2/4 bar structure with 16 triplet notes. So in real Baroque and sense, this could have been meant to play slower. Since the higher the faster the note value becomes, the slower the speed. I choose this quite faster tempo. One has to choose something, and it's not indicated with the metronome mark. It's written allegro as well. So okay, and then the left hand, that could be one of the reasons to play it slower. You really have to make tone. It gives a kind of speed and a kind of drive to the music. But slower it would be okay. So I couldn't say from my perspective, from my point of view, the both tempi would be possible, because you can regard the 16th note triplets here not quite completely as ornaments, which would really leave or open the way for really in quarter notes or in fast 8-note structure, when the faster note values than 16th notes in a normal 4/4 or even in 2/4 bar becomes faster. It slows down the tempo. Except in the fact, in the situation where the faster note values only are ornament, and there can be for a whole piece, but here they are quite structural. So even then in my tempo, that's a quarter note, for 8 notes. And you know, we've mentioned that before, 2/4 and Czerny really adapts to that. Is actually 4/8 in many cases. So many rondos and prestos of last part sonatas, Mozart, Haydn, are indicated presto because the 2/4 bar structure is indicating not too fast, so it's compensating that to my view, as I think about that. So there are quite difficult passages. So even it's difficult for me just to jump in and to play it without focus and concentration, and that's great because Czerny combining the beautiful music as I think it is with technical exercises, and obviously that's something that you won't find with Bach. Although I must say that Bach is more difficult than this. This kind of technical jumps with both is only this very late 18th century and early 19th century, but Bach is more difficult in other ways, much more difficult actually. Great music. I won't tell you to say much more. It's not very much more to say. You could listen to the recording. And then the fugue, 4/1 fugue, and it's really good. I mean, from polyphonic standpoint, if I can say so, I think it's great music. I made, as I did with the Prelude, but certainly with the fugue, you wouldn't expect that maybe, but I made a very thorough, very good fingering. Good in the sense of I worked the fingering out with the written numbers. And that's necessary because there are hand positions that Czerny thought of, and it's obvious you should play that you have to find. Like for instance here, you have to jump in the left hand to this, and then find the fingering to do this, and then go here also in the left hand. If you just try to solve that with silent substitutions, like going everywhere with your fingers and just try to grip some, you won't be able to keep this movement. Singing kind of progression. Also it's really to the extreme, but it feels very great. Right hand has to help the left hand. Here it comes, but here there's only one possibility to go to correct the position of the right hand in order that it can help the left hand is by going under the third finger with the fourth finger, and then you have the position here free. So that's quite complicated. It's not difficult, but it's complicated. Yeah, it's difficult in the sense that if you play this and you don't stick to your fingering, it really becomes a mess. There are other passages here. So it's quite complicated. And then this is very much legato. So I use more silent substitutions than I would do with Bach. And on that I will come back in the future. You might have heard that I have the plan and actually working on that, on a book which has as title for the moment a kind of practical guide towards a more historical performance practice. That's a mouthful just by saying that it would be a reflection of my ideas as we speak, and fingering will be a major part of that. I think it's a very underestimated element in the historical informed performance practice. But here, and then of course in the Baroque, that's my point, I would say that finger substitutions are seldomly accepted in the German sources. The French sources are a little bit more free on that, not too much, but the German sources, C.P. Bach really is saying that it's not accepted, and it's possible. It gives a kind of freedom and good structure. But here to play that legato, I think that's meant by Czerny. See the theme, and the clavichord requires a little bit more legato than the organ would do. I think it's, and 19th century also, I think a bit more substitutions are okay. Other passage here, which is quite complicated, with all these sixths. And then this sudden shifts dynamics. So forte, and then piano. Forte, piano. to the fourth finger here to play this note, that note legato. So this helping left, right is what makes this really complicated, as is in the complicated fugues of Bach also, but that to a lesser extent than here in Czerny. It feels more right in Czerny. Bach's fugues are often difficult to play. This is quite okay, but it's complicated. It's kind of difference. So, what am I saying? Actually, it's interesting. There's so many things to say. We would have these afterthoughts for 2 hours, I think, but that would last too much. I just want to touch up on some elements. So that was Czerny, probably the last one we were doing, unless you all sent me emails and post a description of notes in the description box that I have to play another one. We will certainly do more of this when the pianoforte comes, which is probably, I don't dare to say you, but probably early September, beginning of October. It is on the planning in Joris Potvlieg's workshop for the third week of July to be finished, and then it will remain a few months, the piano in his workshop, just to check and to fine tune, and then that will be something I'm thrilled to have, that piano really, and then we will do a lot of Beethoven. And finishing with that, I got one question, if I would forget the clavichord when the pianoforte comes, so don't worry on that. The clavichord is in a special room in my heart, and that will never change, not with the pianoforte. It's the closeness and the intimacy and the direct expression you have on the clavichord is something you will not find on the pianoforte. There are other things. So I'm not diminishing the worth of the pianoforte as an instrument. That would be ridiculous. But the one-to-one communication with your instrument is so immense on the clavichord, and so that will never leave me, I hope. So tell me what you think about this Czerny. Really, I'm looking forward to that, and thank you for watching, and as always I thank you for subscribing and sharing these videos with your friends, and we see each other next time again. Bye.